Well, ladies and gentlemen, I woke up to news this morning, then I had to pull my video, and then I had to record a new video because the news was just like, yeah, I got to do this story. And that is that Jacob Zuma has been Epsteined. Yes, Jacob Zuma has been Epsteined. So it's quite important to understand that in my comment section, I get quite a bit of hate. I mean, you expect that. You have a certain audience, people kind of hate you for the things you say. Some people agree with you, some people don't. But some people say to me, bloody Zionist shill, I bet you're going to be in the Epstein files or something, as if I've ever been to, well, America, let alone like the Epstein Island. In any case, these individuals quite frequently want to say that everybody else is going to be Epsteined while saying, Jacob Zuma, blah, 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 all these guys great. And Jacob Zuma's been Epsteined. Who knew? Anyway, before we get on to the main video of today, can I guys again remind you, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, help me on my journey to 200,000 subscribers, and let's get on to the news. And the first news story I want to cover is just actually a follow-on from my news story on Saturday. Now, if you watch my video on Saturday, you will recall it was all around South Africa kicking out Israeli top diplomats. Now, just as a brief summary of what happened on that case, South Africa declared Israel's diplomats, their top diplomats, was Ariel, they declared him persona non grata, so they gave him 72 hours to leave the country. Now, the decision was announced by DIRCO, and DIRCO has cited violations of diplomatic protocol, public statements and social media posts by the Israeli mission directed at Ramaphosa, and failure to notify DIRCO of visits involving Israeli officials. So just to be clear that those public statements directed at Ramaphosa on Twitter are usually like Ramaphosa saying, I don't agree with X, we shouldn't do X, and the Israeli embassy will say, we agree with this, don't you, Ramaphosa? Like, isn't it strange how you're giving the statements and not applying that principle to Israel? That's pretty much it. Like, it's pretty much shining a mirror back at South Africa and saying, here's all the things you say you stand for, but actually when we look at it, you don't. Now, the failure to notify DIRCO of visits involving Israeli officials, and I covered this in my video from Saturday, actually relates to many of the visits that Israel does with traditional leaders in order to help their communities. And obviously the ANC look like twits because they do nothing for the country. And many of these Israeli NGOs are attempting to provide water and funding and hospital and electricity to rural communities that really need them because the South African government isn't doing it. So DIRCO said that these actions constituted a breach of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. And so it was because of that they made the individual persona non grata, kicked him out of the country. Now, it's important to understand, South Africa has had no Israeli ambassador since late 2023. Remember that just after October 7th, we sided, as in South Africa, the ANC sided with Palestine, or Gaza, and they basically supported Hamas for the atrocities that they committed in Israel, and they had already said that any retaliation against them would be a genocide and that Israel is the occupier and what. And so obviously they withdrew their diplomats. So South Africa had previously also withdrawn its diplomats from Israel. So around the same time period, they withdrew their diplomats from Israel. Israel withdrew their ambassador from South Africa. And so the two haven't really cooperated, which is why if you actually see what South Africa's achieved, apart from putting that active ICJ case against Israel for genocide, apart from that, there's been nothing really positive coming out of South Africa. They haven't negotiated anything. They haven't been involved in any of the negotiations or the peace talks. Like, pretty much haven't done anything. Pretty much the story of South Africa, right? So, as a response to kicking out Israel's top diplomats that were here, Israel declared South Africa's senior representative to Palestine persona non grata. Now, it's important to understand that Palestine is supposedly Judea and Samaria, the West Bank of Jordan, and they have to go through Israel to get there. So if they make that individual persona non grata, he doesn't have access to the West Bank because the West Bank is Israeli controlled. So that individual was given 72 hours to leave, and the announcement was made, obviously, by Israel's foreign minister. Israel stated that further diplomatic steps may follow, and the prime minister also endorsed the decision. That's Benjamin Netanyahu. So where that goes in terms of tit for tat, we don't really know. Now, obviously, in South Africa, we had the usual retardation that occurs whenever you have these type of events. News 24 wrote loads of praise pieces for Ramaphosa, all with Islamist-aligned journos. I mean, they're all opinion pieces, but you never know that the way that News 24 writes. So News 24 is like, oh, yeah, these guys, yeah, terrible, South Africa, good, ANC, great. Nothing like being an ANC shill, News 24. In any case, a spokesperson for DIRCO, on behalf of Ronald Lamola, said, "We have appointed an ambassador to the state of Palestine. Israel's obstructionism forces a farcical arrangement where he is accredited through the very state that occupies his host country. This underscores Israel's refusal to honor international consensus on Palestine's statehood." Now, the international consensus they're referring to are like all the lefty countries that said that they recognize the Palestinian state. It's amazing that Ramaphosa, when he refers to places like Iran or even in South Africa, he says that other countries shouldn't interfere in your territorial integrity. They keep doing this to other countries. They seem to think that they, I don't know, run the world, but the world doesn't have a say in South Africa. Now, in normal fashion, I'm sure you can expect this to occur. This caused a lot of problems within the GNU because various GNU parties are quite pro-Israel and some aren't. So let's have a look at what happened. Well, the Freedom Front Plus opposed the decision and said that the GNU parties were not consulted when this occurred, and they warned of trade and diplomatic consequences being the result of this poor decision. The DA said that public diplomatic escalation could harm trade and investor confidence, and they said that this shouldn't have basically happened in such a public manner. The EFF, who wanted to be full retarded, said that they supported the expulsion and actually called for the full closure of the Israeli embassy because nothing says coordinating peaceful talks between two parties like, I don't know, just not talking and closing all channels. Like, yeah, that's going to really be useful, said no one ever. Now, this is the third high-profile diplomatic sanction under Ramaphosa, and this obviously also includes his previous cases, such as the U.S. ambassador, who was made persona non grata following the arms shipment allegation, and the removal of the deputy minister after his unauthorized U.S. trip. What we're really seeing is that this idea of just expelling all of these individuals isn't limited to Trump. Like, this is pretty much what South Africa is doing. And so when Trump goes and expels their ambassador, the South African ambassador to America, it's pretty much in keeping with the diplomatic norms that we're now seeing out of DIRCO. Now, coming back to what actually caused the kerfuffle, remember they said non-notified visits of top officials to the country that weren't notified to them. Well, this was actually a visit facilitated by a king in the Eastern Cape. And this visit was without DIRCO approval, and it was without the Eastern Cape provincial government approval. It was just the king inviting some individuals to his village, and those individuals went there. But you see, the problem was that the trip itself was all over social media. And there was some coordination with local medical centers, and those medical centers were obviously very happy to accept donations, things that could improve their clinics or their hospitals. But DIRCO said that they weren't happy, that there was a foreign nation doing what they themselves weren't willing to do, and they called that a diplomatic breach. Now, the king said that he doesn't need to seek their permission, and he claimed royal authorities superseded protocols in the country. And he said, I'm a king of my land. Why can't I just invite whoever I want? So that's a kerfuffle in itself, and we're going to see how that progresses. But it was hard not to notice that the visit coincided with the expulsion announcement, so it was hard not to connect the two. It was clear that the Israeli diplomats visiting this location was what actually prompted the expulsion in the first place. Now, the South African Jewish Board of Deputies criticized the expulsion and said that the move directed attention from domestic crises and placed them onto foreign entities like Israel. What should have been happening is that people should have been looking at the domestic crises, the things that these Israeli diplomats were attempting to provide assistance to, these Eastern Cape communities, and gone, maybe we actually need to do better to our own people, and it's not good for other people to have to come sort out our problems. Maybe we should sort them out ourselves. But that's not what happened. The South African government, specifically DIRCO-aligned South African government, this takeover from the Islamists, if you want to call them that, And I keep talking about the Islamization of South Africa because you see, the problem in South Africa is everything is too easy to capture. We got state capture, we got police capture, we got this capture, we got capture of the tender system. And South Africa just doesn't have the appropriate checks and balances to stop captures of some variety somewhere. And the reality is, when you bring Islamists into the country, it's easy for them to capture the state too. That's the point. The point is that the state is too easy to capture. And we've seen this now in Durko, because now we've got foreign relation capture, if you want to call it that, via foreign entities. So what really should have happened is that those captured entities should have said, let's work on making the Republic better, let's fix things ourselves so that other entities don't have to get involved. Nope. Ideology before poverty. They really didn't care about the plight of the locals. Just screw them because free Palestine or something. This is the retardation that we have when it comes through to the ANC's government. These guys are not smart. In any case, talking of not smart, let's move on to the story that we all want to hear about, and that's, well, Jacob Zuma and the Epstein files. So Jacob Zuma has been mentioned in the Epstein files. Now, the US Justice Department released additional Epstein-related documents at the weekend, and there were email references to Jacob Zuma being invited to dinner with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the dinner allegedly was planned for March 2010, and the location was the Ritz in London. Now, the Jacob Zuma Foundation stated that Zuma had not been accused of wrongdoing and describes any reports that he was Epsteined as misleading. But you see, the Epstein documents actually became rather important in that there was some revelations that came out of them, specifically in relation to Cape Town. Because as part of the files, what they saw is that Cape Town was repeatedly referenced, and the time frame for that was around 2009 to 2014. Now, the emails described Cape Town as a focus for scouting models, and phrases used in the documents included, potential of girls is huge. So it looked like they wanted to scout Cape Town for potential Epstein models, and apparently Cape Town was the place to do it. Now, this was all being done by a modeling agency named Pure Management, which is referenced in the Cape Town documents. Now, Durban and Johannesburg appear to be less frequent in the documents. So it does seem like Cape Town itself was one of the key locations where, well, everything was mentioned from. But it's important to understand that no criminal charges have been announced relating to any of the South African relations. It's just these are the individuals who have been cited in the Epstein files. Now, that location, the Ritz London, that apparently Zuma was invited to dinner for, apparently actually went to the dinner. And what occurred afterwards is subject to debate. Some are suggesting that maybe this was the start of where he got involved in Epstein activities potentially occurring in London. It's all speculation at this point in time, right? So everybody's jumping onto the bandwagon and saying, well, where there's smoke, there must be fire. But it's important to understand at this point in time, the emails only suggest that they met for dinner, they did meet each other, they did have an exchange, they did talk, and that's pretty much it. So we can't really say more than that. It's nice to speculate, but all we know is that so far he's been mentioned in the Epstein files. Now, I know there's going to be somebody who also mentions this, and so it's important that I mention this too, and that is that apparently Rob Hersoff was mentioned in the Epstein files too. But Rob did say that he actually never really met Jeffrey Epstein. Apparently he went to a dinner once, Jeffrey was there, Jeffrey took his details, and that he had recorded them in the file, and that was it. Like, apparently he never actually had any further interaction with the guy. It's kind of like me going to a dinner, you're there, you take my details because you're like, oh, who's that guy? And that's it. Like, so Rob says that any inclusion of himself into the Epstein files is purely, well, antidotal. In any case, ladies and gentlemen, that's the news. Let me know what you think of everything in the comment section below. Until next time, bye.